Excellency President William Ruto, Honorable Cabinet Ministers, AMFI principals and colleagues, development partners, investors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Across history, nations that transform their destiny do so at moments when leadership chooses to build the future rather than wait for it. Today is one of those moments. Your Excellency, let me therefore begin by congratulating you, the government of Kenya, and the people of Kenya on the signing into law of the Kenya Infrastructure Fund. Moments like this matter because they signal something deeper beginning to take shape across Africa. For too long, Africa's development has often been spoken about as something that will happen someday, when conditions are right, when foreign direct investment improves, or when the world suddenly becomes fairer or turns attentions to us. But history teaches us different. Nations do not develop because conditions are perfect. Nations develop because leaders make the deliberate decision to build. This is the significance of today. Today is not simply about a new fund. It is about a decision by Africans taking ownership of our development agenda, a decision to move from aspiration to execution, a decision to intentionally build the future deliberately. Because Africa's progress will ultimately not be written in declarations or headlines. It will be written through our institutions, our capital, and our execution. And that is precisely what today represents. The Kenya Infrastructure Fund, a decision to move from conversation to execution, from aspiration to construction, from potential to prosperity. This initiative aligns closely with what we at the Africa Finance Corporation describe as the Build Africa framework. A simple but powerful idea. Africa will rise when African capital builds African infrastructure that powers African industry. The Kenya Infrastructure Fund embodies this philosophy. It mobilizes domestic capital, it channels that capital into strategic infrastructure, and it creates the conditions for industry and value creation to happen here in Kenya. Your Excellency, the ambition of this initiative to catalyze up to 40 billion in infrastructure investments over the coming decade is not only bold, it reminds us of a fundamental truth. Africa is not a collection of small economies. Africa is the market. And this is precisely the vision behind the Compendium of Strategic Minerals that we launched recently, a tool to give life to the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which Your Excellency has consistently championed. Because when Africa operates as a single economic space with integrated infrastructure, coordinated policies, and open regional trade, the scale of our market becomes transformational. When Africa begins to organize itself as a market, the world will no longer ask whether Africa is ready. The world will ask how it can participate. Now, consider what $40 billion of infrastructure investment really means. It means demand on an enormous scale. Millions of tons of steel, millions of tons of aluminum, thousands of kilometers of copper and aluminum cables, petrochemical inputs, cement, construction materials, machinery, engineering services, and logistics. Infrastructure, therefore, is not only about connectivity. Infrastructure is demand. Infrastructure is industry. Infrastructure is jobs. Jobs and more jobs. And once we recognize the scale of demand that we are creating with this infrastructure fund, the next question naturally follows. Where will this demand we have created be supplied from? Will the materials required to build Kenya's infrastructure continue to be processed elsewhere, only for us to import them back at higher cost? Because when that happens, we reinforce the dysfunctional extractive model we inherited, exporting our resources, freight on board, FOB, and importing them back costs insurance and freight. In effect, exporting the jobs required to process our natural resources only to import inflation. That cannot be the future we accept. Instead, we must deliberately align three things. First, the demand created by infrastructure investments. Second, the infrastructure required to process resources efficiently, particularly power, bearing in mind Kenya's remarkable advantage in renewable and green energy, together with transport and logistics. And third, the resources themselves, here in Kenya and across the wider region. When these three come together, supported by regional coordination and policy certainty, infrastructure becomes more than connectivity. It becomes industrial policy in action. Your Excellency, perhaps the most powerful element of the Kenya Infrastructure Fund is its potential to mobilize Africa's domestic capital. Across our continent today, domestic capital pools across banks, insurance funds, pension funds, central bank reserves, public development bonds, is over $4.4 trillion. So, what this means is that Africa is not short of capital. What we have lacked is the organization of that capital. Consider Kenya. Kenya's pension industry and insurance industry manage over $30 billion in assets. I mean, Dr. Kili talked about it in trillions, in shillings. Allow me to talk about it in dollars because I'm not getting used to the national currency, but I'll soon get used to it since I'm going to open up office here. Let me also use this moment to recognize the important role played by institutions such as CPF. Dr. Kili, whose leadership in mobilizing pension fund capital into AFC has been followed by other parts, like our friend Dr. David Koros of NSSF and several other pension funds that have invested in AFC, and with whom we will work with to ensure that we create the conditions for us to together support this significant milestone. And we'll support it by both working together as partners and also providing any credit enhancements that they require to mobilize even more funds to work with us. We have a couple of pilots that we have identified where we're working together to build or rehabilitate airports and some toll roads. So we have a huge pipeline where we're going to work with, and we think that we would work with them to continue to see how we can support this initiative. So the question before us is simple. What proportion of these savings, the $4.4 trillion savings, the over $30 billion in Kenya, should help finance the infrastructure that will create jobs for the children of the workers whose savings we manage? Infrastructure funds like this provide the bridge between long-term savings and long-term national development. Because when domestic capital leads, international capital follows. This is how infrastructure ecosystems were built across Asia. The first world aspiration that we have, these are the structures that they put in place. So we need to replicate them if we're going to get there. And to unlock this at scale, standardization will be essential. Standardization in project development, in risk allocation, in governance frameworks. When infrastructure becomes a recognized and reliable asset class, pension funds can allocate capital with confidence. And institutions such as the Alliance of African Multilateral Financial Institutions, here today, stand ready to walk this journey alongside pension fund managers and governments across the continent. Your Excellency, next month, the Africa Finance Corporation will convene, together with the government of Kenya, the first Africa We Build Summit here in Nairobi, fittingly the home of our new regional headquarters. We're deeply grateful to you for agreeing to host this important gathering, and more importantly, for being a champion of the Africa we build. The purpose of that summit is simple: to mobilize Africa's own capital to build Africa's future. Because the challenge before Africa is not the absence of capital, it is the organization of that capital. The Africa We Build Summit will therefore bring together heads of governments, the African Union, ministers, cabinet secretaries, AMFI principals and delegates, development partners, investors and institutions, banks, around a shared objective: to mobilize Africa's domestic capital pools to finance infrastructure and industries that will power the Africa we build. Because ultimately, the question before our generation is not whether Africa has the resources. We do have the resources. Africa has resources. It is not whether Africa has the capital. Africa has capital. The real question is whether we have the conviction to organize those resources to build the future we want. Today, Kenya has answered that question with clarity. And if we replicate this spirit across our continent, the story of Africa will change within a generation. Because the Africa our children will inherit will not be the Africa we hoped for. It will be the Africa we chose to build. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you at the Infrastructure Summit. Thank you.